America, the richest nation on Earth, yet drowning in over $34 trillion of debt. But how did the world's most powerful country end up owing more money than it can ever repay? Was it wars, Wall Street, or something much deeper? Something designed to keep America trapped in an endless cycle of borrowing? Today, we uncover the hidden history behind America's debt crisis, the secrets the government won't tell you, and why this number keeps growing no matter who sits in the White House. Stay till the end, because the truth will shock you. When America declared independence in 1776, it wasn't just a fight against the British Crown. It was a fight that would create America's very first debt. You see, wars are expensive. Muskets, gunpowder, uniforms, ships, all of it needed money, and the brand new United States didn't have much of it. The Continental Congress couldn't exactly walk into a bank and ask for a loan. So what did they do? They borrowed. The US turned to foreign powers like France and the Netherlands for loans, and they also began printing what they called continental currency. At first, it seemed like a smart solution. Just print money and pay the soldiers. But soon, the value of that paper collapsed. Soldiers were left with pay that was worthless, and the phrase, "not worth a continental," was born. It was America's first brush with the dangers of uncontrolled debt and inflation. But here's the twist. This debt, instead of destroying the new nation, actually became its foundation. When George Washington became the first president, the debt stood at around $75 million, a terrifying number at the time. That's when Alexander Hamilton, America's first Treasury Secretary, stepped in with a controversial idea. Instead of wiping out the debt, why not keep it? He argued that a manageable national debt would actually give America credibility in the eyes of foreign powers and investors. A nation that borrowed and paid its interest on time would be seen as trustworthy, stable, and worth investing in. This was radical thinking. Most people wanted the debt gone, but Hamilton saw debt as a tool, a way to bind states together under one federal government, and a way to ensure America could keep borrowing when needed. In short, he turned debt into power. And here lies the first secret. America's debt didn't start as a weakness. It started as a strategy, a standing on the world stage. But that tool would also become a trap, because once a nation learns to live on borrowed money, it rarely stops. And that's just the beginning, because what happened next, wars, banks, and backroom deals, would take America's debt from millions into the trillions. Fast forward to the early 1900s. America was booming. Railroads, factories, steel, oil. But behind that growth was chaos. Banks were collapsing every few years, markets were unstable, and ordinary Americans were losing everything in sudden financial panics. The most infamous was the panic of 1907, when the entire banking system nearly collapsed in just a matter of weeks. This chaos gave birth to something powerful, the Federal Reserve. In 1913, a group of bankers and politicians quietly met at Jekyll Island, a private resort in Georgia, away from the public eye. What they created would forever change the way America borrowed money. The Federal Reserve, or the Fed, became America's central bank. But here's the catch. It wasn't fully controlled by the government. Instead, it was a hybrid system, part public, part private, giving enormous influence to the very banks it was supposed to regulate. And its greatest power, the ability to print money and lend it to the US government. Think about what that means. From this point forward, whenever the government needed money, whether for wars, social programs, or economic bailouts, it no longer had to wait for taxes to be collected. It could simply borrow, and the Fed would make it happen by creating money out of thin air. At first, this seemed like a miracle solution. America could fund World War I, the New Deal, and later World War II without collapsing financially. But hidden beneath was a dangerous truth. The US was now tied to an endless cycle of borrowing. Every time the government spent beyond its means, the Fed was there to back it up, and every time more money was printed, inflation chipped away at the value of every dollar in people's pockets. This was no accident. The Federal Reserve had effectively locked America into a system where debt wasn't just normal, it was permanent. And here's the chilling part. The more debt America created, the more powerful the Fed became. A cycle had begun, one that would only grow bigger with each passing decade. If there's one thing that has always pushed America's debt into overdrive, it's war. From the very beginning, every major conflict has acted like gasoline thrown on the fire of national debt. Take World War II. In 1941, when the US entered the war, national debt was around $49 billion. By the time it ended in 1945, that number had exploded to over $250 billion, more than a five-fold increase. Why? Because war is the most expensive business on Earth. Tanks, planes, bombs, soldiers, all of it comes with a price tag, and the government paid for it not with taxes, but with borrowing. But here's where it gets interesting. Wars don't just end debt, they create habits. Once the government gets used to unlimited borrowing in wartime, it doesn't stop when peace returns. That's why even after the victory in 1945, America never went back to the low debt days of the past. Debt had become a permanent part of the system. Fast forward to the Cold War. The nuclear arms race and the space race pushed spending into the stratosphere. Trillions were spent on defense, intelligence, and technology, all fueled by debt. Every missile built, every satellite launched, every spy network funded was another IOU signed by the US government. And it didn't stop there. The wars in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan followed the same pattern. For example, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars alone are estimated to have cost over $6 trillion when you count long-term veteran care and interest on the debt. Think about that. $6 trillion borrowed, spent, and added to the mountain of obligations America already carried. Here's the secret. War doesn't just defend nations, it enriches those who finance it. Banks, contractors, and corporations thrive, while taxpayers inherit the bill. Every bullet fired, every jet launched, every base built, it all goes on the nation's credit card. And so, with every war, America's debt didn't just grow, it multiplied. Which raises a chilling question: is debt the price of security? Or is war the perfect excuse to keep America in debt forever? When World War II ended, America expected peace, but peace never came. Instead, a new enemy emerged, the Soviet Union, and with it began the Cold War, a conflict battlefields, but in laboratories, missile silos, and the far reaches of space. The arms race became the centerpiece of US strategy. Both America and the Soviets poured unimaginable sums of money into building nuclear weapons. At its peak, the US maintained more than 30,000 nuclear warheads, each one costing millions to design, test, and maintain. The justification was simple: deterrence. But behind that logic was something else. Every bomb, every missile was another line added to America's debt ledger. And then came the space race. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy declared that America would land a man on the moon before the decade was out. It was a bold promise, but it came with a massive price tag. The Apollo program alone cost around $25 billion in the 1960s, equivalent to more than $150 billion today. Just to prove that America could outpace the Soviets in space, billions were borrowed, spent, and layered onto the national debt. Here's the twist. While these projects drained trillions over the decades, they also created new industries, defense, aerospace, and technology that became deeply dependent on government spending. Once the contracts started, they never stopped. Defense contractors thrived, politicians secured jobs for their districts, and the cycle of debt-driven innovation became locked in. But what many Americans didn't realize was that the Cold War wasn't just about survival, it was also about profit. Every year, Congress approved larger defense budgets, and every year, America borrowed more to fund them. By the end of the Cold War, the US debt had surged past $3 trillion. And here's the chilling part. The Cold War ended in 1991, but the spending didn't. The system built during those decades ensured that defense budgets and debt growth would remain permanent fixtures of American life. The Cold War may have been won without a single nuclear shot fired, but its hidden cost was staggering, and the bill is still being paid today. While wars and weapons fueled America's debt, another force quietly made it permanent: entitlement programs. Unlike wars, which eventually end, these programs never stop growing. It all began in the 1930s with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Social Security Act of 1935. For the first time, Americans were promised a financial safety net in retirement. It was revolutionary, and it won the trust of millions. But here's the secret. Social Security wasn't just a program, it was a promise backed by government borrowing. As more people lived longer, the government owed more than it collected, creating a permanent gap filled with debt. Then came the 1960s. President Lyndon B. Johnson launched his Great Society programs, introducing Medicare and Medicaid. Suddenly, the government wasn't just responsible for retirees, it was paying for healthcare too. The costs skyrocketed instantly, and they've never stopped climbing. At first, these programs seemed affordable, but no one predicted the scale of America's aging population, the rising cost of healthcare, or the sheer number of people who would depend on them. Today, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid make up the largest share of federal spending, trillions of dollars every year. And when taxes can't cover the cost, the government borrows and the debt grows. Here's the irony. These programs are wildly popular. No politician dares to cut them because millions of voters depend on them. That means no matter who's in power, the spending continues, and so does the borrowing. The truth is, entitlement programs were never designed for a world where Americans lived decades longer than in the 1930s, where medical treatments cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and where fewer workers are paying into the system. And that's the hidden trap. The very programs that promise security are now one of the biggest engines of national debt. They can't be ended, they can't be reversed, and they only grow larger with time. The question is no longer if they'll add to America's debt, but but how much longer the system can survive before it breaks. In 2008, America faced a financial earthquake that shook the entire world. Banks collapsed, Wall Street firms crumbled, and millions of Americans lost their homes, jobs, and savings. But while ordinary people suffered, something else happened in the shadows. America's debt exploded. It all started with risky bets. Big banks and financial institutions gambled with subprime mortgages, home loans given to people who could barely afford them. When those borrowers defaulted, the entire system began to unravel. Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old bank, collapsed overnight. Panic spread like wildfire. The government had a choice: let the system burn or step in. They chose to step in, big time. Washington approved massive bailout packages for Wall Street and the auto industry, pumping hundreds of billions into the system. And when that wasn't enough, the Federal Reserve created trillions of dollars out of thin air through something called quantitative easing, a fancy term for printing money digitally. For the public, it was sold as saving the economy. But here's the hidden truth: the cost was added directly to America's national debt. By 2010, debt had jumped from $9 trillion to over $13 trillion in just 2 years. And here's the twist: those bailouts didn't go to struggling families or small businesses. They went to the very banks and corporations that caused the crisis in the first place. Wall Street was rescued. Main Street was left behind. The 2008 crisis proved something terrifying: that whenever the system breaks, America doesn't fix it. It borrows more money to patch it, and each patch comes with a higher price tag than the last. But the real danger wasn't just the trillions borrowed, it was the precedent set. That debt is the first solution, not the last. From that moment on, America had crossed a line. The government learned it could borrow and print unlimited money in the name of stability. And once that door was opened, there was no going back. And here we are at the final truth: the hidden reason America can never fully escape its $34 trillion debt. It's not just wars, bailouts, or entitlement programs. It's the system itself. Every time the government spends more than it earns, it borrows. Every time it borrows, interest grows, compounding the problem. And every time a crisis hits, whether it's a pandemic, a war, or a financial meltdown, the cycle repeats. The real secret? The debt isn't just numbers on a ledger. It's a tool of control. It keeps governments dependent, citizens taxed, and power concentrated in the hands of those who can lend and manage money. From the very first loan after the Revolutionary War to the trillions printed during modern crises, the story is always the same. America borrows, borrows more, and borrows again. And the result is staggering. A number so large it's almost impossible to imagine: $34 trillion. Yet despite this, America still thrives. Its economy grows, technology advances, and life goes on. But the shadow of debt looms over everything, shaping decisions, politics, and the very future of the nation. Understanding this isn't just about economics. It's about seeing how power works, how history repeats, and how a system designed to strengthen a nation can quietly bind it instead. So if this journey through the hidden forces behind America's debt shocked you, imagine what other secrets are out there waiting to be uncovered. We've only scratched the surface, and there's so much more hidden in plain sight. If you want to keep uncovering the truths that others don't want you to know, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't miss the next story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about money, power, and history.